Hello and welcome to the Power Within podcast. I'm your host, Laurie, and today I'm super thrilled to have poet, speaker, and teacher Ravi Gandhi on the podcast. Ravi, thank you so much for being on here. I'm so excited to have you on.
Pumped, Laurie. Thanks for having me. Excited.
So I first heard of you on at the MYM. I was virtually there, and I remember when you started speaking, I got goosebumps. You were doing your '90s poem, and I was like, "Oh, I really resonate with this." And you had also talked a little bit about like your struggles and what got you to that stage. And so, one, I did hear that you're going to be an MYM speaker again, so congratulations on that.
Thank
And
you.
two, I want to ask, I'm going to go back a little bit. So, to get where you were to get to that stage. And I know that you had shared about, you had lost all kinds of weight, you were really depressed and you were in a really bad place. So, can you talk about like what happened to lead you to that point to get you, to where you kind of had that, rock bottom to breakthrough?
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for having me, and thanks for virtually attending MYM. That's kind of cool. That was an experience of a lifetime. We'll get into that. But in terms of where this took a turn for the worse, but really became a blessing, is probably about 5, 6 years ago now. Time flies, but might even be more now. But essentially. Um, I just wasn't. I was really anxious about life, and this had nothing to do. This is way before pandemic era, so I was just anxious about my health, anxious about sleep, and just really not really happy with my life. And I think I just let it snowball and accumulate. And I there were times I felt like I was better, but those were times where I just was using distraction to maybe get over it. And unfortunately, that kind of stuff catches up with you. There's just no way around it. And so you bury it, and then it resurfaces, and then you bury it again, and you think you're doing better, but you're really not. And because you're not getting to the root of your problems. And and so essentially I was just so wound up about life, about everything, like literally anything would make me anxious, uh, that it started to really affect my sleep. And then I started getting panic attacks and anxiety over just sleep, even just about to go to sleep. And in the hours leading up to it, I felt dread, because I knew how sleep was so important in health, and I already had this health anxiety. And so I realized that if I wasn't going to get a good sleep, I was further adding to this health anxiety. And the cycle just kept going. You'd wake up on a maybe an hour sleep, 2 hours, and then you'd feel miserable. Your digestion just was terrible, and nothing seemed to be working, and it just kept going. I would say probably a good 6 months to a year of that, um, where I just wasn't sleeping well, and there were times I'd feel better, but it wasn't really helping. And yeah, in that essentially, I'll say that again, is just I was on the ground. At one point, I had not slept for 4 days, and I just made it to. I remember I just made it to the Christmas break. And I thought, if I could just make it to Christmas break, I'll enjoy the 2 weeks and kind of get better. But so I made it to Christmas break, but then the first 4 days, nothing changed. Nothing. The holidays didn't make it better. And yeah, and my cousin kind of came over and realized what was going on. I'd lost a lot of weight, over the span of a year. I would say I lost, oh gosh, 35, 40 pounds. And so I was down to about 114, 115, and I was like, really, it wasn't good. Um, and, I got to see a doctor, and, you know, they helped in some ways, but in other ways they weren't that helpful, because when it comes to medications and those types of solutions, of course, but when we talk about deep rooted stuff and purpose and a love of life, like those are things the doctors aren't equipped for that. And so I finally just decided to take some time off work, and reevaluate my life. And what I uncovered was one, a reconnection with my writing, which had gone to the wayside for quite some time. And it was incredibly powerful to write again. And did some traveling as well, enjoyed that, did some solo traveling to kind of understand um, who I am as a person. But really, the more important thing was the writing, was reconnecting with writing. And honestly, when people say, you know, and a lot of writers will say this, that it saved their life, like that is not um, a sort of a stretch of the imagination. That is truth. It saved my life, really. And yeah, and I just kind of changed how I looked at health and how I looked at meaning and purpose. And I really I talked about this at MYM. I just charted my life on walls for that time off. I'd done everything. I'd read everything I could. I charted my life. I realized some underlying issues, um, and then the writing just kind of flowed from there.
You just touched on a whole bunch
Yeah,
of things that I want to ask you about. And first, we'll start with health, because I think that that's something really important. And you were talking about sleep and not getting that. And
yeah,
something that I found in my own life is that, like when I used to only get a couple hours of sleep, I would feel that. And you get that kind of burnout. And for myself, I know I had a lot of underlying trauma that I wasn't dealing with either. And so when you're talking about like that writing and healing process, once you start working on your internal stuff, that helps. And also, I think for me too, like I'm someone who I make all my own fresh juices, don't buy anything from the store. Like I try to be very, very careful, because I think people forget how important health is to their everyday well-being and what you're putting into your body, what you're nourishing your body with sleep. But you can be really healthy or you can be unhealthy. It doesn't really matter if you're not taking care of what's going on inside of you to fix those things, because if you don't, you're just going to continue with these constant spins. So
yes.
like, have you found that like you glow and you look fantastic. So I can tell that you're taking care of yourself. Is that something for you, like eating better and all that stuff that's helped you on your journey too?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, this was, and I abbreviated the story so much because the amount of learning, I mean, we talk about, cognitive behavior therapy, which, I quickly, I joined that to understand how I could nip these thoughts quickly. But I read the book before I even went into the first session. So there was, I found it so funny, and I briefly talk about the MYM too. Is like I was finishing sentences because I had read the book already. I was just so thirsty to find solutions, and so that was one of them. And I got out of that pretty quickly because I could change little behaviors. But in terms of nutrition and that aspect of it, functional medicine, and I always tell people about functional medicine, changed my life because traditional medicine wasn't doing what I wanted to. And so when I found functional medicine, which was at the time the closest one was about an hour away, which in Canada is not advertised. They're not allowed to advertise. So at the time, I had to dig that up. I had to try to find this place, and 7 8 years ago, this wasn't so readily available. Now, these kinds of things are everywhere. But so I luckily I found one, and um, through various connections, and they that changed my life too. Learning about uh, s- you know dopamine levels, learning about testosterone levels, and nutrient deficiencies, and predispositions to various genetic things. It's just honestly mind blowing. Now, not everybody can afford it, and so I joke about this all the time. I actually had a pretty big it sounds nerdy, but I had a pretty big comic collection, um, and uh, and I remember that was like when I was stressed out, I could always like, oh yeah, I love my comics. But then you realize after you go through all this shit, it means nothing. None of it. It means nothing when you're down and out. So I remember, selling off all those comics and then using that money to fund my trips, to help subsidize, my time off, but also to pay for functional medicine because it's private and you have to pay for it. And so that's when I learned about all this incredibly empowering stuff about nutrition. And so I do take it seriously. I mean, there was a time where you'd go to the grocery store, and then I remember being so involved with health and my health anxiety. I'd come out the grocery store with nothing because I'd learned so much. I was like, oh no, this is like feeding into the paranoia about everything. But so I've learned to be a little bit more lax about that, and have a slice of pizza is all good. But
Pizza's great.
yeah, it's really important. And the other thing I learned, which was huge for me, is that it's not just about um, consumption and digestion. It's like it's about absorption. And so when you're stressed out and you're anxious, you don't absorb anything. You could have $1,000 meals, it won't do anything for you. And so it's clear that before you get into the whole, and of course you should always eat well, but before you tackle that, you really do have to understand why you're so stressed out. What's the underlying pinning issue? And so health for a long time, and still is, I'm still kind of tenacious and yeah, thirsty for that knowledge of how, like, it's exploding though. There's so much now. It's like red saunas and cold plunges, and there's a lot. It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but that functional medicine, if anybody is struggling out there, and of course if they have the means, functional medicine, find your functional medicine specialist. There's lots of them, and they just give you a more deep understanding of why things happen in your body, and the testing goes to the states, and you just get so much more information. And yeah, so big shout out to Living Proof Institute in Mississauga. They're great there, and they that was years ago, but they really set me in the right track. I don't know, like yeah, it was part of the writing was part of it, finding that purpose. But I wouldn't have been able to even do that if I didn't understand the sort of the health things that were going on, and it was a more like a holistic, like a full picture of your health, not just take this med and you might get better, and kind of sleepwalk through life a bit. That's not how I wanted to live. So um, yeah, I hope
Yeah, I
that.
yeah, it did answer. I love that kind of approach to, like, healthcare versus what the world lives in. I know in the United States, sick care, like, let's have a problem and then have to tackle it instead of trying to fix the problems first. So, another thing that you mentioned before I get into your writing, is you were talking about solo traveling. And this is, something that I did this year, as well, and it changed my whole life. And I think that solo traveling helps you discover different parts of yourself. I'm from the States, so I took some trips to Vancouver and Alberta and all by myself. I knew nobody. And so, I had gotten, when I went to Vancouver, I got injured and I was by myself. And so it was a little bit off. So I was like, oh, I've learned how strong I am in different areas. And so for you, I want to ask, like, for myself, I'm so passionate about this. So I get excited when people even mention it. How did your solo traveling, like, enhance your life and make you grow and expand as a person?
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. It's like you're asking the questions I want you to ask. Pretty sweet. And yeah. So the first one I did, because I was, still timid with traveling. I had traveled, but not by myself. I mean, I've been to Vancouver, but I had sort of relatives I could stay with, and it just wasn't testing me. So the first place I thought was, okay, relatively safe, English. Okay, let's try California. Always wanted to go. I'm gonna do Cali. I'm gonna fly there over the summer, and I'm gonna rent a car, and I'm gonna do this like 10 2 week trip, 10-day 2 week trip, something like that. up the coast. I know it's like so famous, and I want to do it. And but the interesting part of that trip was that before I left, and I tell everybody this, I specifically asked the universe for problems. So before I got on the flight, I literally said, "Okay, God or whoever's listening, can you please give me manageable problems?" And I joke about this, like, don't take down the plane, just give me manageable problems. I swear to God, I said this. So I had already pre-booked everything, like in terms of a car. Get off the flight, and the car rental place is right across, like, right beside or within the airport. And I go there, and they're like, "Yep, we just need your credit card now." And I'm like, "Oh, I thought I already paid." He's like, "No, no, that's just like whatever you need to, whatever deposit holds, whatever. I don't know." And I pull my credit card out, and it literally is snapped in half along the mag strip, and it's my only credit card. I'm like, "Oh shit!" So I hand them. I'm like, "I I don't know what happened, but it's broken. Can you just use the chip?" They're like, "No." "Okay, we'll just punch in the numbers." "No, we can't do that. We need to use the stripe." I'm like, "What? I never heard of this. Like, just punch it in. Come on." They're like, "No, we can't do it." Like, just call it. Like, do it. They're like, "No, we can't do this." Like, are you kidding me? So my first experience solo was getting into a cab. I don't think Uber was around then. Um, and riding around a cab to like 7 different car rental places that would take my credit card, and none of them would. And now I'm sweating, like it's hot, and I'm sweating because like if I don't have a rental car, I am so screwed on this trip. I got places booked, kind of, but not really. That was the other thing. I didn't book any places. Like I knew where I wanted to go, but I didn't book anything on purpose because I
Mhm.
wanted to feel the stress of it. But now, like now, well, now, like, how am I going to get to these places? Okay. So finally, one place like tapes it together and like tries it like 12 times. And finally, it goes through. I'm like, thank God. So that was the first experience, like getting off. Um, yeah, getting off and the plane, and then just a whole bunch of different things. Like my rental car broke down in San Francisco, like on one of those San Francisco hills. I was like, what? This is not happening. And then I got another rental, eventually figured that out. And then the hubcap flew off at one point, and I just thought, what? And I hope they don't charge me for this, like whatever. I went to you. And then the other thing is like I just didn't prepare because again, I wanted to feel that that healthy bit of anxiousness that I could overcome. I did it on purpose. So I went to Yosemite. My sister and brother-in-law got married there, and it just happened to be 5 years later, like right on the day they got married. I was like, okay, I'm going to Yosemite, and I'm going to go to the place you guys got the photo. So all right, let's do this. And then I went, and I had one water bottle, and it says, "Okay, make sure you have like sufficient amount of hydration before you do this 4-hour hike up, whatever." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I got a water bottle. We're good." And by the time I got up, I didn't have any water left. And you can't get water anywhere there because it's only at the bottom. Otherwise, it's all unsafe or something. And at this point, I'm like shivering because I'm so dehydrated. Now, I don't know why there's too much pride. I just didn't ask somebody that was walking by me for some water, but I literally ran down. I When I got to the top, then I ran back and like to try to get water. Like after 4 hours, it was I thought I was gonna die. I was shivering even though I was hot. It was weird. And then I drove up. You can hike to a certain point, but then you can like get your car and then drive up further, which I did to get to the point where my sister had got married. And then I just got caught up in the moment how awesome it was, and then it was dark, and then I had to drive down, but there's no lights. So you're driving in pitch black down this mountain. I was like, oops, I think I stayed here too long. And I like 3 deer, almost hit 3 deer on the way. And after I finally get, I'm like, thank God. And I realized I didn't even have a place to stay yet. I was like, oh shit. It's like, oh no. So now I got no cell phone coverage because I'm at Yosemite, and I guess I'm just gonna start driving somewhere. and I find this restaurant. I'm like, hey, my cell phone doesn't work here, or whatever. Do you guys have Wi-Fi? They're like, no. Actually, yeah. Here's a password. It's private, whatever. Then book a place. Then drive there. It's like a dump, and it was so sketch. The hotel clerk is like so far away with like a bulletproof glass window, like stuff like that. It was just wild. Like I I think at some point I couldn't pull money out, so I had to ask somebody to what? Oh no, yeah, I couldn't get cash out, so I said, "I'll pay for your or something. Can I have your cash and I'll pay for your gas with my Visa or something like that." It was weird, and it was just so long ago now. But like there was just like tons of that kind of stuff. It was wow. I know I'm missing some stuff too, but all in all, like it was beautiful, and that was so awesome. It's exactly what I wanted, and that was kind of the after I got back from that, I was like, okay, if I can do that under all those sort of circumstances and not really know where I'm going and kind of book everything on the fly, okay, I can probably do another one of those. And granted, it was much more easier. I don't know why, but the year after when I decided to do Denmark and Sweden, I thought, okay, let me do Europe, but also a lot of English and safe spaces. So I was like, let's do the Nordic countries. Okay, let's do the Nordic countries. I'm like, okay. So then that was fine, and I had a great time there. And it's kind of uh, exposure, I guess you call it. Like you know, in psychology, they talk about how you overcome things by these types of exposure, and so California felt like exposure to me. Um, so those 2 summers of doing that kind of travel really really helped me, but for traveling wise, and I've been to a number of other places now in Europe and in Alberta, and so it's been great.
That's awesome. I always get excited when I hear people because I've started to like see, with the algorithms, it'll start showing you things when you've liked certain things and stuff on social media. So I've seen a lot of people talking about the growth of that, and I love it because even I experience it in my own life. So I'd love to ask people about that. So thank you for sharing. Um, and I know that
Sure.
you mentioned how your writing really helped you. And I know that your book, Red Pill Rhymes, this is an excellent book, by the way. That
Thank
book
you.
took you 4 to 5 years to put together. And I love it because it's really a journey. And I was one of the ones who I listened to all the podcasts and everything you've been on. So I was one of the ones who read it first from like cover to cover. And then I went back and I have
Thank
some
you.
that I really, really love. But I want to ask you like how that was integral to your growth and changing like your perspective on things. And I know it evolved a lot because a lot happened in the world too.
Yeah, sure. So I would say I had no, I know that my dream was to publish, but at the time I was writing, I didn't think anything of it really, and so I just started writing down. I had written short stories, and I even posted them, but I just found nobody was reading them, and I understood that, and it's a lot to kind of sit down and read a short story, and then I just started writing some poetry. I grew up on hip hop, and I grew up on some poetry that I enjoyed, like Poe and stuff, and I just thought, well, oh, Shel Silverstein, and just kind of those um, interesting poets, and I just wanted to write in a similar style, I guess, blending those two while also telling a story. I didn't want to just write about poems, like poems that were just really short. I wanted to be able to tell stories with them. So I thought poetry would be a good compromise to the short stories. I could make them even shorter, but in poetic. And so I started writing them, uh, and it really almost in sort of a fuck you kind of manner, because I didn't think anybody was had the attention spans to read, especially on social media. So I started being very combative. I wouldn't say I'm some sort of battle rapper or spoken word artist. Like I just thought I could uh, write a bit about how poetry was going, or where it was going, and I felt it was kind of slighting the true essence of storytelling. So the first chapter of the book, which is entitled Ego. If you haven't read it yet, uh, you can tell it's very very combative, uh, but it's very egoic. Speaking to almost as if like, oh, I'm so much better than everybody else because I know where the scene is or whatever. But in actuality, that's how I was writing. It was very combative because again, I grew up on kind of hip hop and just listening to that, and so I wrote in that manner. But it was also very early. So we're talking about 6, 7 years ago, almost 5, 6, 7 years ago, that first chapter really came about. And at the time, I didn't think that was going into a book. I was just writing. And eventually I started posting on Instagram, and it was really just friends and family at that point. I really didn't know anything about social media, like Instagram. I was just posting it really honestly just for friends and family to read. I didn't think, you know, that it was going to grow or anything. But then as you go through your life journey, the writing evolved too. And so, and that's why I'm very intentional about how I organize the book, because you can see the journey sort of unfold, where it's very surface level to begin. And uh, I know that some people will look at that and say, why this doesn't make sense. Red pill rhymes. Why is this first chapter even in here? But if you understand that it's a story to tell as a complete journey, you'll know, I suppose, even by 1/3 of the book in, you'll understand where this is going or where it might go, and you'll understand why that first chapter is there. Because a lot of like when I was organizing it, I thought, I don't know, should I get rid of this? And I touched them up because they were so old at that point, but I felt it was necessary to put in. And I tell people this too. I didn't want to make a book just of like ranting and raving about Justin Trudeau or like just the whole craziness of, like, I could have cut that chapter out and done that, but it's just not a story to tell when you do that. It's just Twitter rant, and I don't want a Twitter rant in a book.
Hmm.
And again, the first chapter, I didn't know where I was going, and then the shit hits the fan, on my life. But then, and I kind of overcome that, and I'm writing, and then I don't know where this is going. I just have a lot of poems, and then the world you know goes to shit, and then I realize, oh shit, now I know what I'm supposed to do with this book. So this is that sort of reframe where we could get caught up in the corruption and the fear, which I think, admittedly, a lot of people were in, and me included. But once you see, you can reframe it and use it as a gift and as a blessing. Okay, all right, I have, let's say, time off work, or I'm at home more for that year, pandemic year, and it's like, okay, well, I can definitely write more, and now I can actually speak to what's going on, and now I know where this book is headed, and I understand what I'm supposed to do here. Honestly, it felt like it was meant to be in so many different ways. So the book kind of is like very surface, and then you'll see like a crashing of my life, if you will, and then it kind of goes like this in a more uplifting manner. But throughout all of the book, there's you can see the evolving of the writing and the writing process too, because I really wanted to um, write a book that poets and poetry readers would enjoy too, not just, let's say, the freedom loving community, if you will. I wanted, people, writers, let's say, to understand. It's like, oh, I see what he did there. Like, okay, he's talking about, writer's block, and so it's like there's like nods to writers there. There's odes to film in there. There's just a lot of different things kind of meshed in there. Um, but it all kind of came together, and the title and the cover. It's just, honestly, it feels like the more and more time goes by, because at first I was like, ugh, but the more and more time goes by, and the way, how so many are waking up, but also just ascending. I love that word. How we're moving forward with all of this. The more I'm so glad that I left the book the way it was. And there's going to be people that probably read a little bit of the beginning and go, "What? Like this doesn't like you know where's all the poems like bashing Joe Biden or whatever? Like, where's all that kind of stuff? Like, where's the Klaus Schwab, lines? Like it's not really. There is stuff in there, but you gotta kind of go with it. Yeah.
And I love that actually, the book is, I think that it offers something for everybody. And I don't think that, I know I've heard you speak and say, you wanted it to be something that unified or didn't divide people, and I really felt that way because, I was one of the people that kind of was, when everything happened, people who spoke out really made me angry. And I, and I was like, why would you do that? Like, that's really irresponsible. And, the government, they would never, like, and then I got tested and I said, well, okay, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I started doing my research, and so I love that, looking at it from a perspective of where I was, like in reading your books, like I really appreciated the poetry in there because I could feel my own journey in there of like, oh, okay, well, something's changing here. So I really appreciate it, and I think that like it has that point to offer to people who, even if they have different views or different political views or anything, it gives the people a space to read it and go, okay, like I want to have a conversation about that. And that's what I loved about your book so much. And that's why I was like, I really want to talk to him on the podcast because I do feel like with your writing, you've created like this space, even if someone doesn't agree with your views on something, to open up a conversation and start that.
Mm.
So I want to say like kudos to you for that because it's like it's really really great, and as someone who came from that perspective, like looking at your book, I can look at it from that perspective and go, oh, you know this is something to consider and open my mind. So I think you did a great job with that.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I like the idea of the gentle nudges as opposed to screaming and yelling. And I think that's something that we probably, all of us who are in this type of community, have kind of realized now that, you know, stats aren't working, pictures aren't working, videos aren't working. Like none of that is working. Screaming is certainly not working. And so I think we realize that ultimately everybody comes to their own awakening moment, and we all have our own, and it so rarely comes in the form of like, oh, I saw this video and it's like blew my mind. I mean, sometimes, but I think more often than not, something happens to you personally that causes you to reevaluate your own being, and then you start questioning things within yourself, but then again the world. And again, that's why this book is set up that certain way. If first questions yourself, going through that process, and then once you're done with that, you start to have questions once you're clear about the world, because you can see the world for perhaps what it is now, on better terms and clarity. And Jordan Peterson talks about cleaning your own room. In a way, it was like that. And
Yeah.
Jordan's been, instrumental in sort of finding my own strength. And so I really think about that I'm just so happy that it's set up that way. And thank you for appreciating that sort of that touch on the book. It's just, yeah, it was super important to me. And I won't get the super hardcore, whatever you want to call them, the diehards, the fuck Trudeau's, the diehard ones, on board with the book maybe. And that's okay. I'm okay with that if that's what if they're looking for something else, and I understand that. And so, but I think right now, the more people that, and the trajectory is the same for everyone, right? Like everyone goes through that anger
Yep.
and that angst, and a lot of people will stay in that for more longer than others. But eventually, you'll do this sort of swoop, and you'll ascend. And I think whether they get the book now, let's say, or they'll appreciate the book now or later, if they come back to it or they weren't ready for it, or they just happen to run into it later on, I hope that just seems like a more lasting uh, piece of writing than something that's just for that moment and just to fill the void of that anger, I guess, that
Yeah.
fulfillment in that respect. I didn't want it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
there is ranting in there. Don't get me wrong. There is, but it's, yeah. And that was fun to write about too, but it is mixed in, I feel,
Oh
nicely
yeah.
with other things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Like it would, like you said, like a journey. Like so, you get those different perspectives. Now, as a
Yeah.
writer, I do want to ask you about censorship. So,
Yeah.
um, this is something that, was very heavily prevalent over the past couple years, whether it was social media, whether it was, government, anything, everything was kind of censored and people didn't want to, you couldn't question anything. And I also see now, like schools, especially in the US, I'm not sure about Canada, like they're starting to ban books. And I remember in college, one of my professors, he made us read Fahrenheit 451, where they burn all the books and all that. And I remember how I think that's Ray Bradbury, if I'm remembering right. And
Yeah.
I think of that book often now when I'm seeing banning and take this off. So as a writer and someone who likes to express yourself in that way, can you speak to censorship and how like we can like try to discourse that of what's going on now to bring back, that openness of being able to freely speak and write and share?
Sure. I think uh, during these last few years, we all realized that I think action doesn't really happen for the person unless it affects them deeply, in a more closer manner or personal manner. And so for me, yes, I was angry about what was going on, and it did affect me some ways. I could kind of skirt through life still and be okay, but censorship was the big one for me. When they started, when they were changing my way of learning, or trying to gather information about what was happening, or what I'm posting or what I want to say, or seeing people that I wanted to hear from or get information from them being censored, that's when I knew we had a big problem in this country and many others. And so, um, like you, Fahrenheit, I mean, one of my top five. It's such an important book to me, and I didn't think that we would be living through this, but it's clear that we are. Uh, yeah, I'm not a fan of banning the books, no matter how horrendous they may be in now. I don't think that's a good idea, and how we're supposed to learn from the past. And I think for me, my opinion is when they try to ban books, they're just trying to erase history. And at what point will will that stop? Like they can erase some of it, and then as it gets more ambiguous, they can go ahead and erase that too, until eventually you're left with whatever they want, uh, as their sort of skewed representation of what life is and history, whatever that may look like. And yeah, just seeing, again, Jordan was a big influence, and and seeing how Jordan was being censored, and cancel culture is a form of censorship, and all of this was deeply frightening to me as someone who has a fondness for writing and reading. I just thought, well, how am I supposed to share my thoughts in a space where it can be, sure, um, upsetting, but I should be allowed to say things. And so, yeah, that's when I really pumped up my efforts in my book. And you'll see again in a chapter in that, you'll see more of that fiery fight back about censorship in many poems in the book. You'll see, it's like when I feel that come on, you'll know, like when that's happening here, you kind of see it appear in the book. Like it's all kind of again in a flow, but uh, I take that very seriously, and now with all the new regulations that are coming in, and I try to share, because a lot of people from the states don't know this, but I try to share Canadian news, and it doesn't work on social media. And friends and I in the states talk all the time, and they'll try to send me things and say, "Hey, did you see this?" And they'll be from Rebel News or whatever it may be, and I have to keep reminding them, like, dude, I can't see that, like I can't read that because it just says, error or whatever comes up. They're like, "Oh, what? I can't believe it." They can't believe that, and I can't believe it either. Sometimes, like, there's ways to skirt around it, but like, what are we doing here? Like, it's clear they're trying to cover up truths, and all the wrongdoings they've had for the past few years, and any future wrongdoings, and that is very frightening. Because if you can't have free speech, you can't communicate uh, amongst the public, amongst society. I mean, you're done as a society. You are done as a free society. That's the one thing you need. If you don't have that, it's over. And with these new bills and regulations, yeah, I mean, I write poetry about this all the time in kind of more chewable ways, I guess you could say, and not so, you know, I don't know how to, it's like poetry and protest through poetry, I guess. But I try to do it in more creative ways. And sure, it gives ammunition for that creative outlet, but uh, I'd rather not have to do that.
Yeah.
I'd rather just be able to speak freely, and so it's a very touchy subject. I mean, I just saw Alex Jones is allowed back on Twitter, and people are going bananas over that. But you know, I agree with it. I think after 5 years, he's apologized. He should be allowed back on, and generally speaking, you should be allowed to say what you want, and let kind of the platform and society decide whether or not uh, that's something that you have earned or can keep, let's say, as opposed to just big government deciding for you. And I'm not a fan of that. Like, big government should never decide that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people got into this kind of like the government is our friend, and they absolutely are not. And I could really see that when they started like giving people checks, and people were like, "Oh, they're helping," and I'm like, "It's not gonna help. Like, do you see what's gonna happen later?" And I know I when I go to Canada, I it always shocks me. Like the inflation in the cost of homes and the food. And I'm like, how do people survive there? I'll go see my friend. She lives up in and she lives in Ontario province, and I'll go up and I'll be like, "Oh, I want to just go to the store and get a juice." And it's like $10. And I'm like, What is this? Like, how do you get like fresh stuff?" And she's like, "Laurie, sometimes I have to, budget and say, do I want to feed my dog or do I want to feed myself this week?" And, even
Yeah,
here, like people were given, all this money, and then, look at now they can't afford anything. Everything's gone crazy. So that was something for me to learn, like that kind of the government is not your friend. I know that you think they are because they'll give to you, but what they're going to take away is 10 times that, and it's going to hurt you even more in the long run.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like this. We had serve checks that go out and just bribes. I mean, they're just bribes. And yeah, it's really bad here. It's really bad. People are struggling. People are hurting, and the same people that were kind of calling me conspiracy or really pushing back against what I was talking about or caution, warning them about what this means down the road. Those people have disappeared. Those people are twiddling their thumbs or just being super ignorant or just they don't want to admit that they were wrong. And here we are, inflation's so high, house prices out of control, and the faith in the government is at the lowest I've ever seen in my life. And from what I've seen with polls, this is the lowest prime minister rating I've ever seen, the Canadians have ever seen. So within the public, I can't remember what the approval rating is, but it's like 13% or something. It's something stupid. It's so low. But he has created pacts with other parties, and so we can't kind of flip him over yet. And so I don't know how many years left. 2 more years? I don't even know. But beyond that, it's just the standard of living here, healthcare. My gosh, healthcare, and it's bad. But yeah, to get back to the free speech stuff, again, that's the more frightening part because all these things are happening, but they're not allowing people to share that information freely amongst fellow citizens. That's troubling. So
Hmm.
you want to be able to share with and a part of me honestly believes that they shut down so many of these social events or whatever, but not really because of the dangers of dying, because eventually that became clear that wasn't the case. But I think it's my belief is that they just didn't want people talking in group settings about what was really going on. They didn't want to give the public. They didn't want people to get ideas, I guess what you could call it.
Now,
That's how I see it.
do, do you think, I want to get your opinion on this because I know that there's like like there's groups of people who, like when someone tries to censor something or whatever, they want to learn more about it. But then you also have like this big like middle ground of people who won't dig too much. So do you think that that's kind of put in place that way for, because they know that a majority of the people won't go and try to, you know, find out why they want that censored, or, they're going to kind of sway and believe in that. Do you think it's kind of set up that way too when they try to start censoring things?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I know that Canadians in general are rather, what would you call it, ambivalent about certain things. Um, and there's a certain level of that in Canada, which is higher than other countries. And I just think, I'm sure government knows that about citizens here. And so um, I can't speak to that entirely, but what I do know is in the States, some of the stuff that Canada pulled in terms of government just would not have worked in the States. Like it just would not have happened. The citizens there are as divisive as it is, and it is divisive, but
Hmm.
at the same time, you're almost, I know it's a weird reframe, but you're almost thankful that it is. You hope that the people on both sides recognize, I'm glad we have this. Because if we didn't, the other side would run amok. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like this healthy, and that to me, that's healthy. And I know it has been way overblown. It has you know, kind of boiled over. But if you didn't have that, I'm not sure that they would be in, the citizens. Like, I think the citizens in the United States have more rights and have more protections for themselves than they do here in Canada.
Hmm.
So, as divisive as it is, in terms of citizen power, uh, or sorry, yeah, power within the citizens, they're better off there. And I know you have to take that with a grain of salt, because now you have all this huge dichotomy, this huge paradox, like, but it, in the end, it's worth it, and that's why it works. I think that's what I believe. But here, it's just so much sleepiness
Yeah.
around so much, and I think government knows that, and so they can just get away with things so much easier here. And you have CBC, and you have CTV, and you have all these things that are controlled by just basically one or two entities, and they're all on the same side. And so they know that whatever they throw on the TV is going to stick with most Canadians, because they just like, okay.
Canadians are so nice. Yeah. In the
And
US, forget it. They're like, yeah, I don't think so. Like, but I do think here, what I have noticed about being in the US is like when people try to censor or ban or, like get someone, canceled. Well,
yep.
it goes in the opposite direction. Like now, like, you'll see that with the singers and things like that. Like I know they had the song by Jason Aldean, and then there was the other country guy, and people were like, "Oh, you're going to
Mhm.
ban them? Okay, fine. We're going to make them number one, and you're going to ban those books.
Yes.
Okay, now they're our bestseller books." And so
Yes.
I do think that I do think that the United States, like, people don't like to be pushed around and told more, and Canadians are a little bit more nicer, that but I have
Yeah.
seen quite a few passionate ones too, which is great because I think that
Yep.
those little bits will help, expand that.
Yeah, well, we do need them. We do need more, and I hope they're out there. And and everybody's fighting in their own different ways. And I'm fighting with poetry, as weird as that sounds to even hear and say. It's true. I'm fighting with poetry, and the convoy was fighting with their style, and you got protesters, and you got people that are speaking up, and there's comedians and comedy, fighting that way, and podcasters, and it's everyone's kind of doing their thing, whether it's fighting with business, go for it. I love
Mhm.
that. So I do love that about the ingenuity of Canadians in that manner. While we might not be loud, Budweiser, like it like they'll find other ways. It's just perhaps quieter, and that is interesting. That it just means it's harder to find,
Mhm.
and that's why these huge events are just so important. MIM was so important, and there's other ones too, but they're so important because we really do need to come together. It's very fragmented, but it's fragmented because we're just so quiet, um, and so everyone's kind of just doing their thing, fighting quietly. But we should all be able to hopefully unite, and I think a lot of businesses are doing that, which is really cool, and uniting all these great people together, this community, and so that's fun to watch, I suppose. Yeah.
You could even see, like, even being, like, online, just watching it, you could almost, like, just feel, or I could, while I was doing it, that kind of, like, love, like, that, like, there was that net, like, you could feel everyone was very comfortable, and it was, like, a very loving, like, environment, and, just watching, I was so inspired by everybody who came on and spoke, and I think everyone contributed so much, and it was such a great feeling. Even being online, I was like, "Oh, I feel that," like, I can't remember what her name was, but she did all those breathing exercises, and I'm like, "Ooh." Like, yeah,
Yep.
like, it was absolutely wonderful, and I was so grateful for it, to be able to listen to all of you guys speak, and get to learn about new people and new businesses and all that stuff, because I think it's great. Like, I like to buy more Canadian stuff than I do American stuff. So I love that, and it inspired me as well. Like, I walked off and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna give myself a chance to start a business and do that as well. Like, so I've been working on those things too. So kudos to Sarah for putting that together, and for all of you guys. And I think this year is going to be an amazing event as well. So are you have you kind of figured out what you want to do with that, and how you want to present yourself this time, or still working on that?
So, yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I agree with you. It's just speaking about proud moments. I try to think about proud moments of of as a Canadian. When we look back in our life, you know, and I'm 44, and I'm trying to think of proud Canadian moments, you know, and aside from hockey, you know, as a collective, as a country, I guess you could argue there was a time when we were truly peacekeeping, a truly peacekeeping nation, or I felt like we were. Maybe we weren't at the time. Now I question everything, um, but and aside from Terry Fox, which you know obviously I was too young, but aside from that, really the I want to say the convoy was like I never felt more proud to be a Canadian. Like it's so wild to think about that. That's what, and they tried to squash that, and they tried to, you know, bury that, and they tainted them, and that whole thing, and really the amount of tears and happiness for that movement. Even when I speak to people from around the world, you know, from that awakened community, they're like, dude, truckers, holy, whether they're from Australia or like you name it, they all
I
say that
donated to that
was,
convoy. I was like, yeah, good job.
yeah, yeah, it was the most, like, that was a pivotal movement in wherever we end up. People are going to remember that, and they do from around the world. I didn't think they did, but whenever I tell other poets or freedom lovers that I meet across the, you know, through Instagram that are around the world, as soon as they find out I'm Canadian and they're awake, whatever, the first thing they mentioned was like, "Whoa, those truckers!" You know, they showed them, you know, and yeah, I was never more proud, to be honest. Like that was, it's so crazy to imagine that that was, but I'm so glad that I do recognize that, and many others won't, and I understand that, and hopefully they do in time. But that thing really shifted many people's eyes, you know, because even though the media tried to taint that and lie about it, which they did, they couldn't they couldn't do that because so many people attended and had their own videos and their own stories.
Hmm.
There's only so much damage control they could do before the lies started to fall apart. And so that was like, anyway, I just wanted to put that out there because we talk about, you know, how the community came together, but and that's one of the reasons I wanted to get the book out too, because I didn't quote unquote donate, or I didn't even attend because I couldn't, but um, I wanted I wanted to come up with something to help um, fight the cause or whatever you want to call it, and so that's another reason I wanted to put the book out. Um, yeah, in terms of the show, yeah, so happy to be back because that was, oh, that was like one of the best moments of my life. Being on that stage, I was so nervous, and I'll probably make a ton of jokes again about it because I don't think a lot of people knew that I did not prepare for that because I didn't realize how professional it was. So kudos to Sarah because I was like, this looks like a real TED talk, and it was like that kind of flavor. It was just whoa, and the amount those speakers again, I didn't really hear, but I didn't really know too much about them. I was kind of new to the community. You know, I had only got involved through Sunit, who was the best and so funny, and you know, I talked about that at MYM. I DM'd her, and then I just met some other people that way. But I didn't know anybody. I didn't really know, and so I went. And the first day, I just thought, "Oh no! Like this is like I have not prepared enough for this at all." And so I actually left the dinner early, I think the Sunday night, and then stayed up till like 4 in the morning to get something on this on a slideshow that I make on Google Slides on my phone because everybody else had all these prompters and like buttons and like all these like I was like, oh my god, I don't have any of this. Okay, so I'll just gotta make jokes, I guess. So in terms of what will happen in Calgary, definitely some more jokes, but I think what I can say is that I'm trying to plan in the middle of planning more of an experience uh, with it as a um, and so perhaps there'll be music involved. Um, perhaps, you know, a backdrop or a background screen, and but these are all tentative plans, and but I do hope to have that, because I the next step for me is audio, and learning how to use my voice, and read in a more, how do you say, I don't know, delightful manner, and that's something that's new to me, because it's I'm an introvert. I write. I can write, but in terms of performance, that's like, even that on stage that day, I was like, oh my god, I was so nervous. But
It was
I think
beautiful
the
though.
next time I won't.
It was beautiful because
Thank you.
like you could
Thanks.
feel that like authenticity coming from you. And one of my favorite moments, aside from your 90s poem, which I know you didn't put it in the book, but I still love that. And I keep the recording just so I can listen to it. Um, was I think it was towards the end of it, and you were like, okay, I want everyone to pick up their phones and you're gonna follow me
Yeah.
on Instagram. And I was like, I like him. Like you had that really authentic energy. And just on a side note, you have one of the most aesthetically pleasing Instagram accounts I've ever seen in my life. And it's perfect, like symmetry. And
Oh,
your
thanks.
voice is wonderful. So anyone who's not following you should go check you out because your Instagram is just beautiful. And I do love the how you read your poems and then you've got your photos. And I know your sister did the art in your book and she did a beautiful job with that. So kudos to bringing on your
Thank you.
sister too.
Yeah, that was fun. I talk about that a lot too, because I couldn't find an artist. I didn't even really look. I was just stressing over the idea and about who's going to do my art, and it just, again, just stars align. And I don't understand why I didn't think of that earlier. Like, that's what she does. It was so dumb. Anyway, so she did that, and that was really great. And thank you for saying that. I was really glad that the jokes landed. But and yeah, I have. It's so funny because Carla put out an Instagram post today saying, "Hey, we don't have to have an aesthetically pleasing Instagram to still, do well." And but she said you can still do it. Just it's not. And I've I've toggled with the idea of changing it, because at some point I'm going to have to. And if people go to my Instagram, RK Gandhi, you'll quickly see that it is set up a certain way, but from the person who's running it, that's me. I have to post three things at a time for the rest of my life, otherwise it doesn't work. And I don't really know how long I can keep doing that.
Yeah.
So, but I do enjoy that, and I do enjoy fun, and I don't, just so people know, I don't. I have my sister's art there, but she doesn't do all the art, because I post all these new poems now, and I can't possibly bother her for more. But I just try to find art. I try to find art online that works, and if it doesn't, I kind of do my own, like, cutting and pasting, and making it work somehow, and hopefully it does work. But yeah, I enjoy, because when I started that Instagram account, it was just photos back then, right? And so, I was like, okay, I'm gonna make this so awesome. And then they switched everything to reels as the thing, and I'm just like, no, what am I gonna do with my life? But I have started doing more reels and audio reels, and I'm glad that people are enjoying that, because I do have to get better at expressing my own words. And so it serves as practice, especially because people don't know that I've like take like 400 attempts to make it work on my reel, and because I'm a perfectionist that way, I try to do it the best I can. And I hope when people go visit the Instagram, and I don't post any of the my poems from the book now. It's all new stuff, but if you enjoy the new stuff, you should like the book too. It's kind of similar style and rhyming, and
It's all
uh,
amazing.
thank you.
I want to put you on
Yeah,
the spot.
experience. That's what I want. Yeah.
I want to put you on the spot. Now, I know I didn't ask you to do this, but there's two poems in your book that I love, and I was wondering if you would mind reading them and sharing about them. if you
Yeah,
wouldn't
sure.
mind. Okay.
Okay.
So, my two favorite poems in the book are page 140 and page 150, those two poems. So, would you mind sharing them?
140. I'm trying to predict what 140 is. 140, that seems like. Ooh. No, I can't think of it.
You want me to tell you which one
Oh,
it is?
I knew that. Oh, really? That one, eh?
I love that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't read that one forever. Okay, and sorry, what was the other one? What
And
page is
page
it?
150.
Okay, 150. How interesting is it that you chosen, oh yes, you've chosen sort of from that spot in the book where there's a big a shift, I guess you could say, a more empathetic, loving shift, if you will, vulnerable, all of it. Okay, yeah, happy to read those.
Thank you
Happy
so
to read
much.
those, Laurie. Okay, so if anybody is not familiar, I generally don't say the title of the poem till the end. Um, Sometimes that title is goes hand in hand with the poem, so it might even rhyme or it provides context for it, or sometimes it's just the title. Okay, here we go. By the way, how's the sound? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound fantastic.
Okay, great. Here we go. 140. I'm just gonna double check here. It's been so long. Yeah. Okay. The lack of empathy for others is the real global pandemic, and the full extent of this illness reveals the scope of our epidemic. A selfish heart is the quickest way to become emotionally anemic. Guarded, we wear our daily mask like it's ritual and academic. Closing off the path to within only perpetuates more pathogens. Vulnerability deemed as weakness, a transcended type of COVID. The strain that strains our soul, our well being, and our existence. A virus of the consciousness, the cure being wholeheartedness. The vaccine is our own vitality. We need injections of the human spirit. This builds antibodies in anybody, releasing superficial hindrances. Immunity for all means courage to let go of protective mechanisms, structures that keep us sluggish, susceptible, and on the defensive. These are limitations that threaten the way we observe impermanence. How we journey home and atone is a much better test for robustness. Yes, it'll always feel like a shock, but the sacred requires maintenance, just what the body and heart needs, a pure and natural responsiveness. This is not a time to stockpile. No, it's time to take stock of our living. Happiness thrives on generosity, kindness, truth, and to be authentic. To be free from judgment means we don't quarantine ourselves from this. Instead, let us all be open to give, receive, and ultimately be fearless. This is called Love Outbreak. And there's the picture there. It's a mask with hearts on it.
I love that
It's so
poem.
interesting that you chose that one. Yeah, and this is after quite a few poems about raving and ranting about, well, yeah, highlighting some of the indiscrepancies of the world. Um, yeah, sorry. And 150, you said?
Yes.
So kind for letting me read. Oh, yes. Yeah. I wrote this poem. That was actually an early poem that I wrote that just wouldn't fit well with the first chapter. And so I just shuffled it over towards this part of it. I do, yeah, I do enjoy this one. Okay. Um, yeah. I was 1,000 messy pieces packaged in a neat little box, a man lifelessly existing just for show, nothing more than pretending, no intention or thought. Pleasure seeking happiness was all I'd known. That's when you discovered me, unhinged, overwhelmed, distraught, hopelessly spilled across the cold, hard floor. But with your hand and heart open, you picked me up and brought me back to life, rescuing me from a sea of cardboard. You helped me put myself together, and with patience you fought to understand this puzzle till the parts became whole. Eventually, the man I used to live in all but died off. The moment of openness, I knew I wasn't alone. No longer was I incomplete or judged, nor did I feel lost. I simply surrendered until I was broken no more. Everything fit perfectly into place, filling in the empty spots. And with unconditional love, I found purpose and a soul. This is the missing pieces. And there's the art to that. If you can see that, okay. Yeah. Thank you for letting me read that.
I love
Yeah,
that
I really
poem.
enjoyed writing. I enjoyed writing this one. Thank you, because I rejigged that poem, no pun intended, with um, because I really wanted to make sure people understood that no one's coming to save you, and love is not supposed to save you. Love in general may save humanity, but for your own issues and your own deep-rooted stuff, like someone's love is not going to be the one that fixes that. And so I wanted to make sure that even though in this poem it represents finding love, that they simply allowed the space for that, and acknowledged who you were. They saw you for who you were, patient with you, um, and that really allowed yourself to get out of the mess that you were in, and so that's the meaning behind that one.
I love that one so much, and I looked at it a little bit differently when I read it, and how I looked at it was from a self-love and a self-accountability versus like another person. And I really resonated
Yeah.
with that on a big scale because like you said, you know what, no one else can fix you. You have to do it yourself, and it's hard and
Mhm.
it's messy, but you know what? You can't love anybody else in this world until you love yourself. So I that one resonated with me hugely. So like that is, I think, probably my favorite poem in the book. Now, do you have a favorite poem that you would like to share?
Oh yeah, this is so tough because I was looking at it yesterday, and just trying to figure out what would be some really cool poems to read in podcasts, and I just there's a lot, but I really right now I'm gonna get to it because this copy doesn't have all my little bookmarks in it, but I'm gonna get to it, and it's easy to find because this is when um, the first chapter kind of takes the turn, and I guess I perhaps want people to um, understand where it's going. Um, there are little clues and poems in the first chapter. There's like something's up here, but this is the yeah, yeah. I'm gonna read this one. Uh, Actually, should I? I don't know. I want to give it away. Yeah, whatever. I'm just gonna read it anyway. Okay. It's long, so hang in there. Okay.
All right.
All right. Here we go. We need to chat, and honestly, you're gonna hate it. It'll hurt right now, but long term, it'll be appreciated. Your writing and I are a mirror. It's time you face it. Your fears and the identity that you've created is the sum of your life and experiences accumulated. You hide when you're scared, deliberate and calculated. A compartmentalized trapdoor that sits adjacent to poetry that keeps you in denial and persuasive. You only love with makeup on, caked on and fakeness. Nice try, but I can see right through your personifications. Our previous meetings were a farce. The only explanation is that you're lying to yourself in a false arbitration. You said you'd listen, but you took it as an accusation. Self sabotage for short term relief. So, congratulations. You're surviving. Barely. But you're not awake yet. Not talking about distal functions and the brainstem, but prefrontal cortex, soul searching, and circulation of the heart, higher purpose, God, and aspirations. I waited and waited. Now you've become the patient, burying symptoms with poor lifestyle modifications. You may not know it yet, but this is self deprivation. A low lidocaine to try and numb all your sensations, a thickening of the skin, and a dermal coagulation from all the cuts and bruises and emotional abrasions. I can no longer stay silent. It would be like I participated. I gave all the clues you needed to arrest this escapism, but your mind served another and turned double agent. Now you take pot and shots to chase them, a cerebral kamikaze to avoid any real confrontation. A mix of ice cold conscience and white hot temptations, basking in self loathing is your form of self medication. But what's your end game to this sad and sorry narration? Keep this facade up is keeping this facade up is a lot of upkeep and maintenance. A living movie script, while written for film adaptation, always has an origin story with a sequel information. Can't just Thanos snap your way out of this and erase it. You're smart, but I've known you for many ages. Jung, Erickson, Freud, I understand all the stages. I got your number, even as you write crisp new pages. So how do you like them apples? This shit is Matt Damon. Goodwill Hunting, but this dialogue isn't entertainment. I'm not even trying to be mean, insensitive, or salacious. Just saying, you better figure it out fast and accelerate it, because you're headed for difficult trials and tribulations. Your persona is lamented in lies, thinly veiled and painted. Does that sound about right? Is that a good summation? I've grown tired. I'm sorry, maybe it's time we break it. I hope you're ready. The next chapter won't be so painless. Bedside conversation.
That's
Yeah, that's
amazing.
one of my favorites.
That's an amazing poem. I
so
love
I,
that.
it's just, and I do enjoy the fact that it has a double meaning because you could interpret it as like sort of a breakup, and a partner saying this and saying, "I'm done with this. I've tried. I'm done." But really, it was more like self-talk, and you're talking to yourself and understanding why you do the things that you do. And so, when people read the book, they're going to see a lot of that psychology in there, where I'm talking to the persona I've created. I'm talk and I even talk to other poems. I refer like to other poems in there, and so there's a lot of wall breaking going on. But I do love that because that is the poem that kind of like shifts this whole thing over. And yeah, I really enjoyed writing that. Thank you for letting me read that one.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. And I want to say thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm very selective, and I really just bring on people who have impacted me. Like, that's the people that I'll invite, like people who have impacted me and helped me make positive changes for my life. So I want to say thank you because your work also contributed to that. So I feel very grateful that you took the time to come on my podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Laurie. I'm glad we could make that work. Yeah. Thank you for everybody for tuning in, and I hope to have a conversation with anybody. Please communicate. You can DM me on Instagram or email me. Go to my website redpillrhymes.com and just open up a dialogue. And I'm just so grateful to connect with other people. And if writing can be the way we do that in poetry, amazing. Yeah.
Awesome. And I'm looking forward to watching you grow and expand and see all the exciting things that happen for you too. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Laurie.